OK, we're just going to leave Ivor Bennett there because the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, this is in response to the attack on Friday. He's there with James Paterson. We're just going to take this for a moment before we return to what's going on in Syria.
Leadership has led to a very divisive period in our country, and we have been saying for a long period of time now that the anti-Semitism has always been there in a society like ours, but it really has been exacerbated over the course of the last 13 months. The government's initial response to the protest on the steps of the Sydney Opera House was completely and utterly inadequate. The protest that went on for months and months at our university campuses was a demonstration of hatred, not just towards students but academics and other visiting fellows, etc. And the discrimination, the blatant racism that we've seen against people of Jewish faith and heritage has been obvious on a daily basis. Thousands of cases of people who have been targeted in their businesses, in their communities, in their places of worship, and that is thoroughly unacceptable. So today I announce that stronger action and national leadership will be brought to the table, and a Dutton coalition government will act from day one to fix Labor's law enforcement crisis through a number of policy measures, and I'm going to ask James to outline some of those. But we will be creating a dedicated anti-Semitism task force led by the Australian Federal Police, by ASIO, by the ACIC, the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre, AUSTRAC, the Australian Border Force and State Police. It will look at the historic complaints that have been made since October 7 last year in relation to doxing matters and in relation to blatant acts of discrimination and racism online and threats that have been made to people of Jewish faith in our country. It will strengthen the provisions of Section 501, the character test under the Migration Act, which will be targeted at those people who are non-citizens who will be deported for their conduct, which is deemed to be anti-Semitic. And it will provide an opportunity for us to say in a very clear voice, unequivocal to the Australian people, that we will not tolerate racism of any description and we will not tolerate anti-Semitism in any form. And our position has been clear from day one. And we will work with the Australian Federal Police. My expectation is that when the next election takes place and we form a government, the Australian Federal Police will have done the preparatory work to stand up this task force on day one. I'll ask James to go through a little more of the detail, and then we're happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Peter. As Peter said, the Prime Minister's failure to lead and his weakness since the 7th of October has directly led to the tragic events that we saw at the Adass Israel Synagogue on Friday morning. The Jewish community and the opposition have been crystal clear for 14 months now. If the Prime Minister doesn't show moral leadership and take real action on the anti-Semitism and extremism crisis in our country, then there will be terrible consequences, and those worst fears have been realised. What we need is strong action, not just words, not just platitudes, but action. We need the law to be enforced. And that's why a Dutton coalition government will establish this new AFP-led task force with our key intelligence and security and law enforcement agencies to crack down on this crisis and enforce the law. Because when you fail to enforce the law, when there are no consequences, then extremists become emboldened. In addition to this new task force, which, as Peter said, we expect to be up and running from day one, we will also be issuing a new ministerial direction to the AFP to call on them to prioritise anti-Semitism, including any outstanding complaints and unsolved crimes against the Jewish community since the 7th of October, including doxing, the public display of terrorism symbols, incitement, harassment and other offences. And critically, this will also include the re-evaluation of any decisions to not proceed with charges over the last 14 months. We'll also be directing the Anti-Semitism Task Force to refer any visa holders involved in acts of anti-Semitism for immediate cancellation of their visas and deportation. We will amend the Section 501 of the character provisions of the Migration Act to ensure that this anti-Semitic conduct is captured by the law and will apply retrospectively for all acts of hatred towards the Jewish community since the 7th of October. And in addition, and finally, we'll also deliver the $32.5 million security funding package that's been requested by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. But critically, we will do so without any strings attached. And that includes funding armed guards at schools and synagogues and other community centres, the Albanese government has only agreed to fund unarmed guards. And this is very important because it's sending the perverse signal to Jewish schools and community centres and religious centres that instead of having armed guards as they have right now, that they should downgrade their security at these community centres and have unarmed guards. A Dutton coalition government will ensure that the Jewish community has the protection it needs and that this extremism crisis, which is festered in our country, is tackled and addressed.
The task force, how big would it be? How many officers would you want on it? And, can you just talk us through why all those different agencies?
Well, Simon, we'll take the advice of the Australian Federal Police Commissioner. So far we've been denied a briefing from the AFP Commissioner and the Director General of ASIO. We had requested that straight off the back of the bombing of the synagogue, and I've been, frankly, just dumbfounded by the fact that the Prime Minister's office has refused to provide that. Now, it has been arranged with the AFP Commissioner for this afternoon, but still not granted for a briefing from ASIO Director General Mike Burgess. But obviously, James and I have worked in this area before, and we have, particularly in the Home Affairs portfolio, as the Minister there, I was able to bring together groupings and task forces to respond to particular incidents and events. So it will take whatever resource is required, and we'll take that advice from the AFP Commissioner. So it'll depend on how many of the matters have been resolved to the satisfaction of the AFP and how many matters need to be revisited. But I'll make it very clear, whatever the resource requirements and whatever the costs, they will be met, and it will be a very substantial task force that will provide reassurance to all Australians that we don't discriminate against people on the basis of race or religion.
So can I just clarify, you said you requested a briefing with the AFP.
OK, we will leave that there because we've got a bit to get to this morning, but there you go, a pretty sizeable policy announcement by Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, and the Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson this morning. Now,